Here's a question. Can a house want something? Not in the metaphorical sense. Not this house needs new paint. Or this house wants a family. I mean, really want. Desire, hunger. Call out to someone in the dark and wait for them to answer. And here's another question, just as unsettling. If you spent your entire life feeling unwanted, invisible, erased, if no person has ever truly chosen you, would you notice if the thing finally calling your name wasn't human at all? There's a house that stands alone against its hills. It's not sane. It's been holding darkness within its walls for 80 years. And whatever walks there walks alone until it doesn't. Hi, I'm Ridhima. Welcome to The Old Trunk. Today we're talking about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. What might be the most psychologically devastating horror novel ever written? A book that understands that the worst hauntings don't come from outside us. They come from the spaces between what's real and what we desperately need to be real. I haven't been able to stop thinking about the book since I finished it. Not because I'm scared, although I was. At 3 in the morning, with every shadow wrong and every silence too loud, but because I can't decide what I actually read. A ghost story, a psychological breakdown, a love story between a woman and a house that wants to consume her. Maybe all three, maybe none. Shirley Jackson won't tell you. And that's what makes this 1959 masterpiece so unbearably brilliant and so impossibly haunting. Grab your drink, settle in, make sure your doors are closed, or maybe leave them open. You'll understand why that matters later. Because we need to talk about loneliness, madness, and what it means when the only place that's ever felt like home is a house that shouldn't be standing at all. Let's go inside. Before we get into the meat of the story, I want to set some context. Because understanding where Shirley Jackson was coming from makes this book even richer. The Haunting of Hill House was published in 1959, right at the tail end of the 1950s. That decade of supposed American prosperity and conformity, especially for women. Jackson herself was living this contradiction. She was a critically acclaimed author, but also a housewife and mother of 4 in a small Vermont town, dealing with agoraphobia, anxiety, and suffocating expectations of what a woman should be in mid-century America. And this book, it's drenched in that tension. It's about isolation, about madness, about what happens when you don't quite fit into the boxes society has built for you. The novel was actually inspired by a 19th century paranormal investigation. Jackson read about a group of psychic researchers who stayed in a supposedly haunted house, and she thought, what if I took that premise and made it about the internal haunting? What if the house is less about ghosts and more about what we bring to it? What she created was something that fundamentally changed horror literature. Before Hill House, haunted house stories were pretty straightforward. Things go bump in the night, people get scared, maybe someone dies. After Hill House, the genre became psychological. The horror became ambiguous. The haunted house became a mirror. Stephen King called it one of the greatest horror novels of the 20th century. He's not wrong, but I'd argue it's also one of the greatest psychological novels of the 20th century. It just happens to have ghosts in it, maybe. So, what is this book actually about? The premise is deceptively simple. Dr. John Montag, an anthropologist fascinated by the supernatural, wants to conduct a legitimate scientific investigation of a haunted house. Hill House has a reputation. 80 years of history filled with tragedy, suicide, and madness. It's notorious for being evil, for being wrong somehow. No one who's lived there has been happy. Dr. Montag carefully selects a small group of assistants for his summer-long investigation. He's looking for people who have had brushes with the paranormal, people who might be sensitive to the supernatural. And from a pool of candidates, 3 people actually show up. There's Eleanor Vance, our protagonist, a 32-year-old woman who has spent the last 11 years caring for her invalid mother, who has just died. Eleanor has nothing, no real friends, no home of her own, no life to speak of. The only remarkable thing about her is that when she was a child, stones fell on her house for 3 days. Poltergeist activity, maybe. Then there's Theodora. Stylish, artistic, confident. Everything Eleanor is not. Theodora has a gift for ESP, for knowing things she shouldn't know. She's running from something too, though it takes a while to figure out what. Luke Sanderson is the third guest. He's the heir to Hill House, the nephew of the owner, and he's been sent along to keep an eye on the property. He's charming, irresponsible, and alcoholic in his early 30s, who's never had to take anything seriously. And finally, there's Dr. Montag himself, the rational scientist, the believer who wants proof, the academic who thinks he can approach the supernatural with logic and note-taking. These 4 people arrive at Hill House in the summer, planning to stay for a few months while Dr. Montag conducts his investigation. They'll observe, document, and try to make sense of whatever is happening in this house. And things do happen. Doors close by themselves. There are noises in the night, pounding on walls, footsteps in the hallways. Something that might be laughter or might be weeping. The house itself feels wrong. The angles aren't quite right. The doors hang at odd positions. There's a tower room that's freezing cold. A library that feels malevolent. A spot on the wall in the nursery that's always cold to touch. The story unfolds slowly, deliberately, with Jackson ratcheting up the tension page by page. The supernatural events escalate, but so does Eleanor's psychological unraveling. And here's where Jackson's genius comes in. You're never quite sure what's real and what isn't. Are these supernatural events, or are they the product of Eleanor's deteriorating mental state? The other characters become concerned. Dr. Montag's investigation takes a back seat to the very real worry that Eleanor is not safe, either from the house or from herself. The brilliance of the plot is that Jackson makes both readings possible. This could be a straightforward ghost story, or it could be a psychological study of a woman having a complete breakdown. The text supports both interpretations, and that ambiguity is what makes it so unsettling. Let's dive into the individual characters because Jackson has written them with complete psychological honesty. They're not heroes or villains, they're complicated, contradictory, flawed, recognizably human. They hurt each other without meaning to. They fail each other despite good intentions, misunderstand themselves as much as they misunderstand each other. What she's created are four people who are each already haunted before they arrive at Hill House. The house doesn't create their demons, it just amplifies what's already there. So let's talk about who these people actually are, starting with Eleanor, because this is her story, her tragedy, and understanding her is essential to understanding everything. Eleanor Vance is one of the most tragic characters in literature, and Jackson writes her with such compassion and such unflinching honesty that it's almost painful to read. Eleanor is 32 years old and she has been lost her entire life. We learn her history gradually. She spent 11 years caring for her invalid mother, a mother who hated her, who made her life miserable, who Eleanor may or may not have been responsible for killing. That's the question that haunts Eleanor more than any ghost. Did she intentionally let her mother die? When the book opens, Eleanor is living with her sister and brother-in-law, sleeping on a cot in their home, owning nothing except half of a car that she shares with her sister. She has no job, no prospects, no future. She's invisible. She's 32 and her life is over before it even began. And then she gets Dr. Montag's invitation to Hill House. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor has been chosen for something. Someone wants her. She's special. She's necessary. The thing about Eleanor is that she's a fantasist. Jackson shows us her interior monologue constantly, and Eleanor is always spinning narratives about herself, imagining different lives. And when she gets to Hill House and meets Theodora and Luke and Dr. Montag, Eleanor starts trying on personas like clothes. She lies about her past, makes herself sound more interesting, more worldly. She's desperate to be liked, to be loved, to matter to someone. The relationship between Eleanor and Theodora becomes the emotional core of the book. Theodora is everything Eleanor wants to be: confident, beautiful, artistic, free. And Theodora does seem to like Eleanor, at least at first. They share a suite at Hill House and there are moments of real connection between them. But Jackson is too honest a writer to make this a simple friendship. The text strongly suggests a queer subtext. Remember, this is 1959, so Jackson couldn't be explicit. But there's definitely an erotic charge to their relationship. Eleanor becomes possessive of Theodora, jealous when Theodora pays attention to Luke, desperate for Theodora's approval and affection. Theodora, sensing this, starts to pull away, which makes Eleanor cling harder. It's heartbreaking to watch because you can see exactly how this is going to end, but Eleanor can't. What makes Eleanor such a brilliant character is that Jackson never lets her be simply sympathetic. Eleanor is pitiable, yes, but she's also selfish, manipulative, and sometimes cruel. She has nasty thoughts about the other characters. She lies constantly. She's so desperate for love that she becomes suffocating. And yet, you can't help but ache for her. Because underneath all of that is just this profound loneliness. Eleanor has never belonged anywhere. She's never been wanted. She spent her entire life being told, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, that she's too much and not enough at the same time. Hill House is the first place where Eleanor feels like she belongs. And that's the real horror of the story, not the ghosts, not the supernatural events, but the fact that a haunted house is the closest thing Eleanor has ever had to a home. Jackson writes Eleanor's descent with such precision. Early in the book, Eleanor is nervous but excited. She's out in the world having an adventure, meeting new people. There's hope in her narration. But as the book progresses and the supernatural events escalate, Eleanor's grip on reality starts to slip. She becomes convinced that Hill House wants her specifically, that the house is calling to her, that she's special, chosen, beloved by the house itself. And whether this is the house manipulating her or Eleanor's own psyche breaking down is deliberately left ambiguous. Eleanor is a character who will haunt you long after you finish the book. She's the ghost in this story, long before anything supernatural happens to her. She's been a ghost her entire life, invisible, voiceless, trapped between the living and the dead. Now let's discuss Theodora, who is fascinating because she's everything the 1950s told woman shouldn't be. And Jackson writes her with such confidence and vitality that she almost leaps off the page. We never learn Theodora's last name. She's just Theodora, singular, unique, refusing to be categorized. She lives with a woman friend in the city, and while Jackson can't be explicit about their relationship, the implications are clear. Theodora is queer, and she's not hiding it. For 1959, this is radical. Theodora is an artist, and she has a gift for ESP, extrasensory perception. Dr. Montag tells us that Theodora has been tested and she can identify cards she can't see with startling accuracy. She knows things she shouldn't know. She's genuinely psychic. But Theodora is at the Hill House because she's running away from something. She's had a fight with her friend, the woman she lives with. Something has gone wrong in that relationship, and Theodora has fled to Hill House for the summer to avoid dealing with it. What I love about Theodora is that Jackson doesn't make her the strong, confident one who saves the day. Theodora has her own vulnerabilities, her own fears, her own capacity for cruelty. When things get intense at Hill House, Theodora doesn't handle it with grace. She lashes out. She's frightened, and she deals with fear by becoming mean. The dynamic between Theodora and Eleanor is complex and painful. Theodora seems to genuinely like Eleanor. There are moments of real tenderness between them. When Eleanor is frightened in the night, Theodora holds her hand. They have private jokes, shared glances. It feels like the beginning of a real friendship, or possibly something more. What's interesting about Theodora is that she's psychic. She genuinely has supernatural abilities, but she's also the most skeptical about Hill House. She doesn't want to believe the house is haunted. She tries to find rational explanations for everything. It's as if her real gift makes her resistant to the idea of other supernatural forces. Or maybe Theodora is just terrified. Maybe she senses what Hill House is capable of and she's trying to deny it because acknowledging it would be too frightening. Theodora represents a kind of freedom that Eleanor has never had. Sexual freedom, artistic freedom, the freedom to live outside conventional expectations. Moving on to Luke, who is the most underestimated character in this book, I think. He seems like a simple character, the charming, never do well, the irresponsible heir. But Jackson gives him more depth than you might initially notice. Luke is the heir to Hill House. It will be his someday, though he doesn't want it. His family sent him to the investigation partly to keep an eye on the property, but also to get him out of their hair. Luke is a problem. He's a liar and a thief. He admits this freely. He's an alcoholic. He's never held a job or taken anything seriously. But Luke is also perceptive and kind. He's the one who notices when Eleanor is struggling. He tries to make her feel included, comfortable. Luke understands that Hill House is dangerous long before Dr. Montague does. He wants to leave. He suggests multiple times that they should all just go home, that this investigation isn't worth it. But he stays because he's the heir, because it's his responsibility, and maybe because he's worried about what will happen if he leaves. What I find interesting about Luke is that he's the only character who doesn't seem to be running from something. Eleanor is running from her past, from her family, from the nothing her life has been. Theodora is running from her relationship problems. Dr. Montague is running towards something. Validation, proof, academic success. But Luke is just there. He doesn't want anything from Hill House. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He just wants to get through the summer without anything terrible happening. Luke serves as a kind of reality check throughout the book. He's the voice of common sense in a situation that has become increasingly irrational. Now let's discuss Dr. John Montague, who is the character I have the most complicated feelings about. Because he means well, but he's also responsible for everything that goes wrong. Dr. Montague is an anthropologist who has staked his academic reputation on the existence of the supernatural. He's written papers, given lectures, devoted his career to proving that ghosts are real and can be studied scientifically. And you can understand the appeal of this for him. He's a rational man, a scientist, and he wants to bring rationality to the irrational. He wants to demystify the supernatural, to make it respectable, to prove that there are phenomena beyond current scientific understanding that can nevertheless be investigated with proper methodology. The problem is that Dr. Montague is playing with forces he doesn't understand, and he's using people to do it. He doesn't think about what might happen if things went wrong. There's something deeply ironic about Dr. Montague's character. He claims to be investigating the supernatural, but he's fundamentally a rationalist. When genuinely frightening things happen, he tries to explain them away. He wants the supernatural to exist, but only in a form he can understand and control. And he is paternalistic, especially towards Eleanor and Theodora. He treats them like children. He makes decisions for them without consulting them. He dismisses his fears and concerns. Dr. Montague is a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating people as means to an end, even with good intentions. Now we need to talk about Hill House itself. Because in many ways, the house is the most important character in the book. Jackson describes Hill House as not sane. And that's the perfect description. The house isn't just haunted, it's fundamentally wrong. The architecture is off. The angles aren't quite right. Doors hang at odd positions, so they swing shut on their own. The house is slightly concave, turning inward on itself. Nothing is quite perpendicular, quite level, quite square. And this creates a constant sense of unease. Even when nothing supernatural is happening, the house feels wrong. You're always slightly off balance, always slightly disoriented. Jackson based Hill House on real examples of Victorian architecture that were deliberately built with odd angles and disorienting features. Some 19th century houses were constructed this way because of superstition. The belief that ghosts couldn't navigate hallways that turned at strange angles, or that spirits would be confused by doors that didn't hang straight. Jackson takes this historical detail and makes it psychological. The house's architecture becomes a metaphor for a mind that's not quite right. A consciousness that's bent, twisted, turned inward on itself. And Hill House does seem to have consciousness. It watches, it waits, it responds to the people inside it. The question the book never definitively answers is whether Hill House is actively malevolent or whether it's just a place where bad things happen. A place that amplifies whatever darkness people bring with them. What's brilliant about Hill House as a character is that it's both a physical space and a psychological space. It's a real house with real rooms and real architecture, but it's also a manifestation of internal states: fear, loneliness, madness, despair. Hill House doesn't just haunt its inhabitants, it gets inside them. It finds their vulnerabilities and exploits them. Or maybe it just reflects back to them what's already there. There's a metaphor here that Jackson is exploring about houses and domestic spaces in general. In the 1950s, women were told that their natural place was in the home, that they should find fulfillment in homemaking, in creating a domestic sanctuary. But for many women, the home was a prison, a place of isolation, suffocation, and slow madness. Hill House literalizes this metaphor. It's a house that should be a home but becomes a tomb instead, a domestic space fundamentally hostile to life and happiness. Now let's talk about Shirley Jackson's writing, because it's extraordinary. Jackson's prose is deceptively simple. She writes in clear, straightforward sentences. There's no Gothic excess, no purple prose, no overwrought descriptions. And yet, she creates this atmosphere of creeping dread that gets under your skin and stays there. Part of her genius is in the details she chooses to include. When she describes Hill House, she doesn't just tell you it's scary. She tells you that the walls seem to push in, that the angles are wrong, that there's always a sense of being watched. She makes the house feel oppressive through accumulation of small, unsettling details. But the real brilliance of Jackson's writing is in how she handles point of view. The book is written in third person, but we're almost entirely in Eleanor's head. We see everything through her perception, and we hear her interior monologue constantly. This creates a fascinating unreliability. So when she tells us something is happening, we're never quite sure if we can trust her. Jackson also has this incredible ability to write dialogue that sounds natural but is actually doing a lot of heavy lifting. The conversations between the characters reveal their personalities, their fears, their dynamics with each other. And often, what's not said is more important than what is said. There's a lot of subtext in this book. The queer undertones in Eleanor and Theodora's relationship, the class differences between the characters, the gender dynamics at play. Jackson never makes any of this explicit, but it's all there if you're reading carefully. And Jackson can also be funny. There are moments of genuine humor in this book, which make the horror more effective. The scenes with Mrs. Montag and her friend Arthur, for instance, are almost farcical. They provide comic relief, but they also serve a purpose. They show us how Dr. Montag's rational approach to the supernatural is just as limited as Mrs. Montag's credulous spiritualism. One of my favorite aspects of Jackson's prose is her use of repetition. Certain phrases repeat throughout the book, taking on different meanings as the story progresses. And Jackson's pacing is masterful. The book starts slowly, with careful establishment of character and setting. The supernatural events begin small, a door closing, a noise in the night, but they escalate gradually, building tension page by page until you are reading late at night and you're genuinely frightened, even though nothing overtly terrifying has happened. Jackson also does something really interesting with time in the novel. The days blur together. You lose track of how long the characters have been at Hill House. This creates a dreamlike, disorienting quality. Are they there for days, weeks? Time becomes elastic, fluid, which adds to the sense that Hill House exists outside normal reality. The final chapters of the book are some of the most tense, psychologically complex writing I've ever read. Jackson brings everything to a head. The supernatural activity, Eleanor's mental state, the group dynamics, and she does it in a way that feels both inevitable and shocking. And that ending, that final paragraph. I won't spoil it, but it's perfect. It recontextualizes everything that came before. It's ambiguous enough that you can interpret it in multiple ways, but definitive enough that it feels like a real ending. It's haunting in the truest sense of the word. It stays with you. What makes Jackson's prose so special is that it's not just about technique, it's about truth. Jackson writes with such honesty about loneliness, about desperation, about the human need to belong. She understands her characters completely, even as she puts them through hell. Reading The Haunting of Hill House is like taking a masterclass in how to write literary horror. Every sentence is doing multiple things at once. Advancing plot, revealing character, creating atmosphere, building theme. There's not a wasted word in this book. So let's talk about what this book is really about, because it's about a lot more than ghosts. At its core, The Haunting of Hill House is about loneliness and the desperate human need to belong. Eleanor has spent her entire life feeling like an outsider, like she doesn't fit anywhere. And when she comes to Hill House and feels like the house wants her, that's seductive. That's powerful. Even though the house is malevolent, even though it's destroying her, it's offering her something she's never had, a sense of being chosen, being special, being home. This speaks to something really dark about human psychology. We're so desperate for connection that we'll accept it, even in destructive forms. We'll stay in relationships that hurt us. We'll remain in situations that are clearly bad for us. Because belonging, even toxic belonging, feels better than being alone. The book is about female identity and autonomy, particularly in the context of 1950s America. Eleanor has no autonomy. She spent her life being controlled by her mother, by her sister, by societal expectations. She has no money, no home, no agency. She exists only in relation to other people's needs and wants. And Hill House offers her a kind of terrible freedom. It's the first time in her life that Eleanor is making her own choices, even if those choices are self destructive. There's something almost feminist about Eleanor's arc. If you look at it in a certain way, she's claiming agency, refusing to be passive, insisting on her own experience and perception. The book is also exploring the nature of reality and perception. What's real? What's imagined? What's supernatural? What's psychological? Jackson refuses to give us definitive answers. And that's the point. Reality is subjective. What's happening inside Eleanor's mind is just as real as what's happening in the physical world. There's also a theme about the past and how it haunts the present. Hill House is full of history, generations of unhappiness soaked into its walls. The characters are all haunted by their pasts. Eleanor can't escape her mother, her childhood, the person she might have been. Theodora is running from her relationship. Luke is burdened by his family's expectations and disappointment in him. The house represents how the past is always with us, how we can never fully escape our history. The ghosts in Hill House, if they exist, are manifestations of past tragedies. But the real haunting is the way the past shapes the present, the way old pain and old trauma continue to echo through time. And there's something here about the nature of evil. Is Hill House evil? Is there a malevolent force in the house, or is the house just a place where human darkness gets amplified? Jackson seems to be suggesting that evil isn't supernatural, it's human. It's loneliness and cruelty and fear and desperation. The real horror is inside us, in our isolation, our damage, our inability to connect with each other in meaningful ways. The house doesn't create these things, it just makes them visible. This is what makes The Haunting of Hill House so much more sophisticated than typical horror. It's not about an external threat that can be defeated. It's about internal demons that can't be exorcised. The book is also, I think, about the limits of rationality. Dr. Montag represents the Enlightenment faith that everything can be understood through reason and scientific method. But Hill House resists that understanding. It can't be measured, categorized, or explained. Some things remain fundamentally mysterious, fundamentally other. This doesn't mean Jackson is anti-science or anti-rationality. I think she's just acknowledging that there are aspects of human experience, emotion, intuition, madness, that can't be fully captured by scientific investigation. Finally, the book is about home and the idea of belonging. The haunted house is a perversion of the home, a place that should provide shelter and safety. But instead becomes a trap. This is the ultimate tragedy of the story. The only place Eleanor has ever felt she belongs is a place that wants to destroy her. And when she's finally forced to leave, she can't bear it. Because leaving Hill House means going back to a life of invisibility, of non existence. Better to belong to a haunted house than to belong nowhere at all. Before I get into my final thoughts, I think we need to talk about the screen adaptations of this novel because they reveal something interesting about how different eras and different creators have interpreted Jackson's work. The first major adaptation was The Haunting in 1963, directed by Robert Wise, just 4 years after the book was published. And honestly, it's excellent. It's one of the rare cases where a film adaptation really captures the spirit of the source material. The horror classic is widely considered one of the best horror films of the period, with Martin Scorsese once bestowing on it the honor of being the scariest movie of all time. Wise understood what Jackson was doing. He keeps the ambiguity intact. You never see a ghost clearly. The scares come from sound design, from atmosphere, from suggestion. The film keeps the psychological complexity at the center. Where the film differs from the book is mainly in streamlining. Then we have the 1999 remake, also called The Haunting, directed by Jean de Bont. And this one misses the point entirely. It's a perfect example of how not to adapt this novel. The 1999 version turns Hill House into a CGI spectacle. You see ghosts clearly, there are special effects everywhere. The film turns a subtle psychological horror story into a loud, effects-driven haunted house movie. The 1999 film represents everything wrong with late 90s Hollywood horror. The belief that bigger is scarier, that you need to show everything, that ambiguity is a flaw rather than a feature. It strips away all the psychological nuance and gives you jump scares and CGI ghosts instead. Then in 2018, we got Mike Flanagan's Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House, and this is where things get really interesting. Because Flanagan doesn't try to faithfully adapt the novel. Instead, he uses it as a jumping off point for his own story. Flanagan's version completely reimagines the premise. It's about a family, the Cranes, who lived in Hill House when the children were young, and we see both their past experiences in the house and their present day adult lives as they deal with the trauma of what happened there. The show is really about family, trauma, grief, and addiction. Some purists hate this adaptation because it's so different from the book, and I understand that frustration. Flanagan changes almost everything: the characters, the plot structure, the ending. His version even gives you explicit ghosts. You see them clearly. There's no ambiguity about whether Hill House is genuinely haunted. But here's the thing. I think Flanagan understood what Jackson was really writing about, even as he changed the surface details. His show is about how the past haunts us, how family trauma echoes through generations, how the houses we grow up in shape who we become. That's pure Jackson, even if the specifics are different. Flanagan also nails the emotional core, the desperate need to belong, that inability to escape the past, the tragedy of damaged people hurting each other despite their love. The Netflix series also does something brilliant with the non-linear storytelling. Jumping between past and present, showing us how trauma works, how memory works. It's not what Jackson wrote, but it's in the spirit of what Jackson wrote. Where I think the series falters is in its ending. Flanagan goes for something more hopeful, more redemptive than Jackson would ever allow. What's fascinating about these three adaptations is how they reflect their respective eras. The 1963 film comes from a time where psychological horror was taken seriously, when ambiguity was respected. The 1999 film comes from the era of blockbuster spectacle, where everything had to be big and loud and explicit. The 2018 series comes from the era of prestige television, of long form storytelling, of trauma as the central theme of modern narratives. If you're coming to the novel after watching any of these adaptations, prepare for something quite different. The book is quieter, more internal, more ambiguous, and infinitely more tragic than any of its screen adaptations. But some adaptations are worth watching, if only to see how different artists have grappled with Jackson's masterpiece and what they've chosen to emphasize or change. Okay, so here's what I think about this book. Having reread passages, having turned it over in my mind again and again, The Haunting of Hill House is a masterpiece. But it's not an easy masterpiece. It's not a book that gives you the satisfaction of closure or the comfort of clear answers. It's a book that unsettles you and leaves you unsettled. What Jackson has created here is a perfect synthesis of form and content. The ambiguity of the narrative, the question of whether Hill House is genuinely haunted or whether Eleanor is having a psychological breakdown, isn't a flaw or a cop-out. It's the entire point. I think this book works on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface level, it's a really effective ghost story. The supernatural events are creepy. The atmosphere is oppressive. There are genuine scares. You can read it as pure horror and have a satisfying experience. But if you dig deeper, it's a devastating psychological portrait. It's about loneliness so profound that death seems preferable to continued isolation. It's about how we construct narratives about ourselves and how those narratives can become prisons. It's about the human need for belonging and how that need can be exploited and perverted. And if you go deeper, it's a social critique. It's about what American society in the 1950s did to women, how it isolated them, how it gave them no options, how it drove them mad. I also think Jackson is doing something really sophisticated with the genre here. She's writing a ghost story, but she's also interrogating what ghost stories mean, what they're really about. Why are we fascinated by haunted houses? What do they represent? What fears are we projecting onto them? And I think the answer she arrives at is that haunted houses are about the past refusing to stay buried. They're about guilt and trauma and the way history echoes through time. They're about places that have absorbed so much pain that they become pain. What I know for certain is that this book has changed how I think about horror. It's shown me that the most effective horror isn't about things jumping out at you. It's about dread. It's about the slow realization that something is terribly wrong. It's about the erosion of safety, of certainty, of sanity. And it's shown me that horror can be literary, can be sophisticated, can be something more than just scaring people. Jackson uses horror as a tool to explore psychology, sociology, and philosophy. The supernatural elements are in service of deeper truths about the human condition. This book also makes me think about all the Eleanor Vances in the world, all the people who feel invisible, unwanted, lost. How many people are living lives of quiet desperation, just getting through the days without hope or purpose? How many people would find a terrible kind of freedom in destruction because they've never had any other kind of freedom? And like all great tragedies, it's both specific and universal. Eleanor's story is her own, shaped by her particular circumstances and psychology. But it's also everyone's story. We've all felt lonely. We've all wanted to belong. We've all constructed fantasies about ourselves to make reality more bearable. Jackson just shows us what happens when those universal human experiences get pushed to their extreme, and it's devastating. So, where does all of this leave us? What do we take away from The Haunting of Hill House? I think this book is essential reading for anyone interested in horror, obviously. It's one of the foundational texts of modern psychological horror. You can't really understand the genre without reading this book. Everything that came after, from Stephen King to her contemporary descendants, owe a debt to what Jackson did here. But I also think this is essential reading for anyone interested in literary fiction. This is a novel about character, about psychology, about the human condition. It just happens to have ghosts in it, or maybe not. The supernatural elements are integral to the story, but they're not what the story is about. What the story is about is loneliness and belonging and the human need for a home. It's about how we construct meaning in our lives and what happens when that meaning collapses. It's about the past and how it haunts us. It's about madness, both personal madness and the madness of the society that damages people and then punishes them for being damaged. These are big universal themes, handled with subtlety and psychological acuity, and absolutely brilliant prose. And I think that's part of why this book has endured. It's not just a good ghost story, though it is that. It's a profound meditation on what it means to be human, to be alone, to search for belonging in a world that doesn't want you. Reading The Haunting of Hill House is an experience that stays with you. It gets under your skin. It changes how you think about houses, about homes, about the spaces we inhabit. But more than that, it changes how you think about people. It makes you think about what isolation does to people. How desperately we all need connection, how dangerous it is to be truly alone. And this is a book I'll keep coming back to. And I suspect it's a book that will keep revealing new layers, new meanings, new relevances as I continue to age and evolve. I'm going to leave you with that opening line again, because I think it encapsulates everything this book is about. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within walls, continued, upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House. And whatever walked there walked alone. Whatever walked there walked alone. That's Eleanor. That's all of us. In our loneliest moments, that's the human condition. We're all fundamentally alone in our own consciousness, in our own experience of reality. And some people feel that aloneness more acutely than others. The Haunting of Hill House is about what happens when that aloneness becomes unbearable. When the need for connection, for belonging, for home becomes so desperate that you'll accept it anywhere, even in a place that wants to destroy you. It's one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, and if you haven't read it yet, you owe it to yourself to experience it. And now I really want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've read the book, which character resonated with you the most and why. Did Eleanor's tragedy hit you the way it hit me? Have you watched any of the adaptations? How do you think they compare to the novel? Which version captured the essence of Jackson's work for you? And here's the big one. If you could spend one night in the Hill House with full knowledge of what happens in the book, would you do it? Why or why not? Do tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them. And I love discussing books with you all. Some of the best insights I get come from your perspectives in the comment section. So please share your thoughts. Let's have a conversation about this masterpiece. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and press that bell icon so that you get notified of whenever I upload a new video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay happy. Thanks for watching. Lots of love. Bye-bye.